Hello, good afternoon. I'm Josina Kameling, Head of Regulatory Outreach at CFA Institute, and I'm also co-president of the 7th edition of the Ethics and Trust in Finance Prize. Today we're at the OECD headquarters, and I'm talking to laureates of the prize who will be getting their award later. With me today is Andrea Bancone, who has written a very interesting essay about the moralisation of contracts, an Islamic perspective. Now, this is interesting because, as he mentions in his essay, following the financial crisis, not a single Islamic financial institution was impacted by the collapse of subprime mortgage bonds. And indeed, on a systemic level, there were no issues at all. There's been quite a strong growth in Islamic finance, and more mainstream newspapers are catching, mainstream research is picking up on this. However, it is still very small, only 2.2 trillion out of 100 plus trillion total assets under management. So there is a way to go. But can it become really mainstream? And so this is what I'll be discussing with Andrea. Now, Andrea, when we look at Islamic finance, does it offer an alternative view to how finance would function if integral business conduct was put ahead of profit motivation?
Well, from the one hand, I would say yes, because there are lots of items from which conventional finance could take inspiration. First of all, the fact that each Islamic finance institution needs to appoint a Sharia board, and the fact that the business model of Islamic finance is somehow inspired by a set of moral values which are drawn upon the Sharia. And therefore, yes, my answer is yes. Of course, there are some weaknesses. There are some threats which should be considered while thinking of including some kind of faith-based values into consideration. First of all, as I discussed in the paper, what I find as one of the major weaknesses in Islamic finance is that in Sharia there is a suggestion that we cannot really judge on intentions. So how can we truly and fully trust a system that is not able to apply judgment on human intentions? And secondly, this is a system that is by nature interpretive. And as I discussed in my paper, some dangers may occur while some changes in interpretation of Sharia aspects come into play. And I discussed the case of a company which indeed was first issuing a bond, and then after distressing circumstances went through a restructuring phase, and then tried to make a second restructuring, but investors were not really able and were not willing to negotiate on this second restructuring, and then the company claimed that due to changes in Sharia interpretation, basically they would no longer distribute upcoming payments. And so there are some weaknesses and there are some threats. So, of course, Islamic finance is something that conventional finance should look at and take inspiration from.
I think it's very interesting. I think also, for example, the fact that the Pope is weighing in on the financial services debate, and there was a very strong paper coming out of the Vatican on 10 years after the financial crisis. Nothing has changed, and more and more people are aware when we look at the Sustainable Development Goals, when we look at climate change, that we have to refocus finance for the good of society. So I think, that in itself is an interesting idea to look at faith-based initiatives and to see how they could work, and they could be part of the whole puzzle. Now looking at, when we look at profitability and risks, let's say, would smaller profits offer a higher social value? Or do we say, well, the risks associated with a Western financial system, which looks at profitability, can that really be used for furthering the social good or not?
Thank you for your question. I would say that first of all, the answer depends very much on what is our definition of social value. What is a society supposed to look for? So, if we take into consideration a society and companies that have smaller profits but more integral values, what are these models able to provide to the society as a whole? So is democracy one major thing to look at when we discuss social value? Also, what are the services that a nation can provide to its citizens? So if greater profits then are able to provide for social welfare and health systems, then maybe we shouldn't be judging too harshly such type of.
So maybe here's my comment to you. Should we go back to our grandfather's way of life, when one piece sufficed instead of three, when we didn't need mobile phones? When are we too greedy, in other words, for this world, for this society? And is Islamic finance another way of saying, enough is enough, and refocusing really what is really necessary, what you really need in finance?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, if we look at progress and what this has provided to us, I would never say that we should look backwards. A major point to discuss is how these resources are being allocated. And I don't think that Islamic finance is allocating resources more wisely or more generously as compared to conventional finance. This is still finance. These are investments. So profitability is still a big part of the business models. There are just some limitations. And that's what I was discussing in my paper. I don't think that indeed Islamic finance is now a model that has been investing in more sustainable type of products or investing in social justice more than other conventional finance countries. So I don't think we should look backwards. We should be putting, of course, more emphasis on business conduct, controls, and we should perhaps one thing we should look backward is that we should find our inspiration. We should be able to find the inspiration in what we do. Otherwise, we will just be numbers. We will just process information, process transactions, and nothing will change.
I think you gave me the right words exactly. Inspiration. We can look back at history and draw examples and learn from it to take us forward, not backward looking, but using what has happened in history and take us forward. And above all, business conduct, integrity, understanding what it is you are doing when you engage in a transaction. I think that is important. Thank you very much.